Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and today, welcome to books my dad was a PhD in English literature thinks I should read because reading them improves my understanding of good literature, or Gwen aimlessly rambles and chatters about real literature. So, this particular book was not a hard read, and it wasn't a hard read in terms of subject matter the way Harriet said is, where you just it's very hard to read about, and it's not a hard read like other books where it's just difficult to physically read the book, whether because of vocabulary or anything else. So this week's book, William Golding's Rites of Passage, which was apparently purchased relatively newish from somewhere because this was an actual hardcover and you can see the price tag on it, which it's not my book, it's someone else's book. He just never bothered to take the price tag off of it. So, Rites of Passage. If this is not a play on words, I will eat something inedible like a hat. Not a hat because I don't think I own any hats, but, you know, something. So why is this a wordplay? Well, the book is not epistolary. It's one of those books told through the medium of journal entries, although one sector of journal entries is someone else's supposed letters to his sister, although those letters are more diarizing than anything else. Indeed, by the end of them, the man writing those letters is clearly stating in them that he's going to not be sending those letters to his sister because he doesn't want his sister reading about them. But the person diarizing this voyage, because it is a voyage, is a very young man who is setting off on his own for the first time. He is of the exceeding upper classes and is going to be taking a place in the colonies as an administrative personage of some sort. And because he's so young, the first meaning of rite of passage is, of course, the concept of a rite of passage, meaning passing from childhood to adulthood. This rites of passage are things like bar mitzvahs, or confirmation to a church, or slightly more dangerous, hardcore rites of passage involving raiding opposing tribes or what have you. They're basically acts that delineate movement from childhood or adolescence to proper adulthood. And one of the thematic lines in this book is that he starts off as a callow youth, and by the end of it is, I believe, somewhat self-congratulatory that he has passed from callow youthfulness to some sort of adulthood. Whether or not he has is, of course, up to the reader, although he has been tremendously shaken by the experience. But shaken in a way that he very quickly throws off, and it would seem to me, at least, although perhaps not to others, that his shaking it off is a sign of the fact that he hasn't matured all that much, rather than a matter of realization that life does go on and you have to keep on going because life goes on. The second rite of passage is that there is one of the central characters in this book is a priest, an English church priest of the English church, the so-called English Catholic Church, and he's setting out to act, in various priestly capacities in the New World, and the refusal of the captain to accept having a chaplain of any sort on board throws in a line of wordplay, a line of conceptualization about the religious rites that ought to take place during such a passage. Um, because, of course, there's a great deal of respect for the clergy in most cultures, whether or not you would actually call them the clergy. But this particular captain on this ship has no respect for the clergy, and it is later discussed and said that he dislikes the clergy because of an incident in his youth, which may or may not be true. There is a certain amount of unreliability to this narrator, if only because we're not getting this from the horse's mouth, so to speak. We're getting this from a young lordling who was told this by a sailor who had heard about this secondhand from somebody who knew the captain. So whether or not the captain dislikes members of religious orders because his stepfather or uncle or what have you was a parish priest or part of the church, well, that's anybody's actual guess. It's not that it's not that this is a genuinely unreliable narrator in that, this is like the unreliable narrators who might be crazy. This is just, he's unreliable in his discussions of motivations or actions because some of this he isn't there for, and some of this he is guessing at, and some of this are things that he was told by other people rather than things he knows for himself. So his interpretations are unreliable because we don't know, or even when we do know his source information, we don't know the source of his source's information. But in any event, so the rites of the passage that ought to have been happening were not, because poor Mr. Colley, the preacher who can't think of word, who's on this ship is being poorly treated. The last of Rites of Passage is a sort of a double play in that Colley dies, and it's suggested, again, by an unreliable narrator who gets his information from an unreliable source. It's suggested that Colley willed himself to death out of humiliation. The event is at first presumed by our narrator to be simply that he got drunk in public and acted poorly, and following being drunk in public and acting poorly, was so humiliated that he didn't want anyone to ever see him again. But it comes out at the end that it is very, very possible that what happened was that this man was effectively sexually assaulted, that one of the sailors insisted that Colley perform fellatio on him, and Colley just could not take it because, of course, it's not just the sexual assault, it's also that you have the compounding of someone forcing him into committing what is effectively a sin, forcing him into a position of doing something that is the Bible specifically enjoins against. So it's not even, he was just assaulted, it was that he was forced into something that was doubly awful, and that all of this piled on top of him, and again, quote unquote, he willed himself to death. That said, some of our sources, again, within the context of the book, are not completely reliable, so we don't know for certain. What we do know is that Colley dies, and you have a rite on the passage, the Rite of Passage from life to death, that there is a funeral, and so you get the rites of passage not merely from childhood to adulthood, but the rites of passage from life to death. So you have 3 layers of potential wordplay just in the title alone, which all connect into the book very nicely, which is why this is an excellent, excellent title, which is far better than any title I have ever written, because any short stories that I have ever written are always horrendously titled, because coming up with a good title is an art form all its own. So, I've already given a pocket encapsulation of large portions of the plot. I had mentioned before letters. Well, these are letters from Colley to his sister, which send our narrator into spirals of despair over how horrible everything is. And then you get to the last section of the book, the last entries of it, and our narrator seems to have gotten over his grief, and it's unclear whether it's been weeks or days or months or whatever since Colley died, and the whole incident was covered up because nobody wants to take responsibility and everybody feels culpable. Although, oddly enough, our narrator was apparently, by some very minor actions on his part, of great comfort to Colley, who, at various points in time, had felt relieved that there was somebody of some rank on board who actually appreciated religion. Whereas our lovely narrator did not so much appreciate religion as felt morally bound to show respect to one of the cloth. So, what did I think of this book? I mean, it's not as exhausting emotionally to read as Lord of the Flies, which I had to read in high school and have only vague memories of. It's clear and easy reading. You can certainly garner some amusement and entertainment out of the excited maunderings of the narrator, who, again, he comes across as very callow, very childish and inexperienced. And the thing is that he does some of those things that we all do, where you say something that you intend to mean one thing, but it implies something completely other than what you meant to say. Which has to do with, at one point, he says to one of the sailors, he congratulates the sailor on overcoming Edmund Talbot, that's his name. As always, I don't take notes, so, I don't remember things. Edmund Talbot winds up telling one of the officers on the ship, effectively congratulating him on overcoming the defects of his birth to emulate the speech of his betters. And the thing is, he very genuinely means to congratulate the man on having successfully developed an air of sophistication and civilization. And he very genuinely means this, but of course the way he puts it very much sounds like, oh, look at you, you adorable little creature trying to ape your betters. And the sailor, not surprisingly, has taken it that way. And this is one of the object lessons Edmund Talbot is faced with, which is sometimes what you say doesn't come out the way you want it to, and you don't even realize it because you know what you mean, but other people don't. There's actually a phrase for that, which I don't remember offhand right now. The ability to realize that other people are not in your head, and therefore you have to base what you're saying not on what you know, but on the fact that other people cannot know what you know precisely. Not that I remember what that word is, but anyways, the thing is that's one of his lessons, is learning how to talk to other people, learning how not to just bluntly say things as they come to mind. He also learns that words have an impact on others, actions have an impact on others, but at the same time, at the end, he seems to shrug it all off with a sort of a fatalistic, well, it doesn't matter and life goes on, but not a mature one. And so there's that last layer of rites of passage, whether or not it actually had any effect, or whether he was just physically rather than emotionally and psychologically moved from one place to another. And that's my time, so I'll see you all next week.